Hello and welcome back to Talking Europe. The war in Ukraine has entered what some officials say could be its most dangerous phase, with Kyiv now using Western-supplied missiles to strike deeper inside Russia, and Russia reported to be using North Korean troops in Ukraine. There's also talk in some Western capitals of sending troops to Ukraine. That's something that's been floated in the past by French President Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, there's nervousness in Europe about what incoming US President Donald Trump might do in Ukraine, the incoming president keeping his cards close to his chest when it comes to his peace ideas. So what diplomatic and military role should the EU be playing? To debate that, I'm joined by Finnish MEP Pekka Toveri from the European People's Party. He's chair of the delegation to the EU-Ukraine Parliamentary Association Committee. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Also joined by German MEP Martin Schirdewan, who is co-chair of the Left Group here in the European Parliament. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Martin, so are we in an escalation right now?
Well, I think that is quite obvious that we are in an escalation. The deployment of North Korean troops speaks a very clear language, but also the use of long-range missiles by Ukrainian military forces deep into Russia, which is clearly also an escalation. What we need to discuss and what we really need to work on is a ceasefire that then enables us to get to a long-lasting and just peace.
Pekka, so an escalation or simply a Ukrainian response to what is being thrown at Ukraine?
I agree with Martin that this clear escalation. The West has been very careful to avoid escalation, given restrictions on the use of Western weapons and so on, and this is how it worked. Putin decided to escalate this by bringing Asian nations' forces to Europe to fight a war here. And that was a response to give Ukraine the chance to strike back. And you have to remember that Russia has shot over 10,000 long-range missiles all over Ukraine, over 95% of that to civilian infrastructure. So it's something that UN resolutions very clearly state that a nation which is attacked can defend. And there's no restriction on that.
But of course, it does risk becoming an uncontrollable spiral in some ways, doesn't it, Martin?
Yeah, well, let's hope that this is not the case. But actually, I don't see the willingness on both sides to now work on a stable peace solution. And if I hear the words of the new High Representative of the European Union, Kaja Kallas, that she is determined to work on a victory, a military victory of Ukraine, then it really makes me wonder in what reality the European Commission lives in. Because clearly this is delusional. I mean, we have to take into account both the political reality and the military reality. And you mentioned already that there might be some changes in politics, international politics, with the Trump administration taking over on the 20th of January. So we don't know what actually is going to happen after the 20th of January. But what we clearly see is that the Russians have the upper hand on the battleground. So we need to talk about peace and not about the escalation of war.
A victory plan, is that the wrong way to go, as your colleague is suggesting?
Well, I agree that we need a peace. How to get there is the big question. Is there a possibility to gain a military victory from Russia to throw Russian forces out of Crimea? It would be possible. I'm not sure that the West is ready to do what it needed to be to achieve that. Therefore, it's better to end and try to achieve a peace which Ukraine can accept. And I think in that situation, I think that the majority of the Ukrainians are ready for something that we call in Finland winter war peace, meaning that you accept the fact that you lose some of your country in order to have a peace and security. But for Ukrainians, the most important thing is to have a credible safety guarantees, because they know that if they make peace now, without safety guarantees, Putin hasn't given up his aims in this war. They will just rearm and attack again in a couple of years' time.
This is exactly what is puzzling me, I have to say, and I agree with you. But what is puzzling is that European politics does not work on these options. They do not focus on these options, but they are just talking about weapon deliveries, arms deliveries, ramping up arms industries, etc., etc. So what we really need to focus on is exactly what also Zelensky started to talk about, how a peace after a ceasefire, a long, lasting and just peace could look like.
Yeah,
and this is up to the Ukrainians in the end to decide, and also the other war party, the Russians, not up to us, but we need to get them on the table to discuss peace on their terms, and you are right there.
Yeah, and the problem is that we don't have any strategy. You know, we say that we support Ukraine as long as needed. That's not a tragedy. That means that war just continues and suffering continues. The strategy is that we said, okay, we create environment where Ukraine can have a peace and make a plan how to achieve that.
Pekka, what you're suggesting about the security guarantees as part of a ceasefire, and that's probably something that you would agree on, Martin, right? But what kind of security guarantees? Because the EU is not a military organization, and Putin would not accept NATO military guarantees for Ukraine as part of a deal. So where does that leave the EU, actually?
Yeah, well, Zelensky is demanding that there is a fast-track accession of Ukraine to NATO. And we all know that this is not going to happen. And also European leaders make that very clear. So, and also according to NATO rules, this is not going to happen. But what we could envisage is, of course, a membership in the European Union. This might already help. And I think we should show some solidarity there in opening our doors to Ukraine, also to the Ukrainian government, to Ukrainian people, to join the European Union. This is already a safety guarantee or a security guarantee. And this is something that we need to work on, but there is no fast track. We need to tackle corruption within the Ukrainian state, and also the European agriculture comes under enormous pressure. This is something we need to work on.
I just want to pick you up, though, quickly before we come to Pekka, because, yes, I see what you mean about the EU anchoring Ukraine, but again, there's no military component to that. It's a civilian project, basically, isn't it?
Well, yes, you are right. At least in the beginning of the European Union, it was a civilian project. Now politics changed course, I would say. Yeah. And there's obviously a militarization in the European Union also going on, which I very much criticize. But there's also in Article, I think 49 it is, of the European treaties, it's like Article 5 in the NATO treaties, that member states of the European Union have to support each other in case of a war breaking out.
Yeah, that's true. That does exist.
I think it's the Lisbon Agreement 42.7 or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, yes, there's it. That's which has been more or less forgotten, and there's been some discussion. Maybe we should again reactivate the fact that yes, we have given some guarantees to each other. It's a bilateral support in case you are attacked, for example.
But Pekka, on the NATO question, your colleague raised that, should there be a clear signal then that Ukraine won't join NATO so as to give some sort of peace, well, let's say ceasefire agreement at least, a chance?
Well, you have to remember that even before Russia attacked in early 2022, President Zelensky promised that he can give a guarantee that Ukraine don't try to get to NATO if Russia stands down, and didn't work.
But now he's changed that position, of course.
Yes, I think that Ukraine is safe when they are member of EU and member of NATO, but it will take some time. And meanwhile, we have to have a safety guarantees, security guarantees for Ukraine, and it can't be just a paper with some ink on it, because Ukrainians tried it once, it didn't work. They gave up their nuclear weapons, against the nuclear safety security guarantees, which didn't work. So this time they want to have some more tangible, more achievable, maybe forces on the ground. And I served in Bosnia after the Bosnian Civil War, and we had the EU and there for several years with UN forces. They couldn't do anything. When NATO went in with armored divisions supported by air power and with mandate to stop the fighting with force if needed, we had the peace and no problems. How to achieve that is a different story, but that's, I think, that we would need to have there.
But what is also very important now is that there is a discussion starting, or a debate starting, at least in German politics, but I guess in European politics in general, about sending peacekeeping troops, European peacekeeping troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire agreement. And this is something that we really need to think about, that we really need to take into consideration. Instead of sending troops that fight a war there, on behalf of Ukraine, which President Macron, the French president, put forward as an idea. some politicians now, for instance, the German foreign minister, put forward the idea of sending peacekeeping troops. And this is something smarter than sending troops into an escalating war.
But I agree with that, but those peacekeeping troops have to be heavily armed with the mandate to use force to stop violations of the peace agreement with force if needed, because traditional UN peacekeeping forces don't work with Russians. We know Russians in Finland very well. We saw what happened during the frozen conflict in Donbass. We have OSCE observers there, and they were just calculating Russian peace agreement violations with thousands, but didn't do anything, so they never stopped. And that's the thing. Are we willing to send heavily armed forces to keep peace by force if needed? Because that's the only way to keep the situation in hand with the Russians.
Well, actually, I think it's up to the United Nations, and we need to discuss also how we could enforce the United Nations and enable them to fulfill their role as a peacekeeping, the peacekeeping organization in the world. And that means also to, enable them, provide them with weapons, etc., etc. So this is their role, in the original role, and they should somehow fulfill it.
And we have seen how the UN peacekeeping operations have evolved through the years. They have come and gone. They have been forced to go to more active role with more open mandate, with more military power if needed, because some places the conflict don't end unless you show that you are ready to use force to stop it.
We'll have to stop there. We've run out of time, but thank you so much to both of you, Pekka Toveri and Martin Shirvan. And of course, we'll be following all the developments around Ukraine, and particularly what incoming President Donald Trump unveils when he actually comes into office on the question of Ukraine. Do stay with us here on France 24.